Chapter 5 King Louis Dies. In the spring of 1381, Louis called to Buddha leaders of the Polish state and church that they might, through a healing decision, restore order. Once again, while the people hoped, their masters assembled, and once again disillusioned. The people heard that the healing decision was the appointment by Louis of a triumvirate to rule their distracted country. They were far from reassured. No one of the men selected had in the past proved himself strong enough to dominate the situation. Now that he had disposed of difficulties in Poland, at least for the moment, the king turned to other matters. He began preparations for a journey to northern Hungary. He wanted to live for a time in his castle at Diószegyőr, one of his favorite hunting strongholds. But now there would be no hunting of boars and stags in this lower Carpathian mountain country. Now he would fight the weakness, the depression, bred of his mysterious malady. In the quiet, he would further adjust his mind to the fact that it advanced on its ravaging way. Had he a grown son, he might withdraw to the seclusion of the nearby monastery, there in prayer and contemplation to end his days. He would hold courts and attend to regional state matters, and these duties disposed of, he would talk with the Benedictines of the monastery. He had already sent word to Venice that the missions she was about to send north must meet him at Diószegyőr, and his own suite, the bishops of Pécs, Zagreb, and Warad, and the bands of Ruthenia, Dalmatia, and Croatia, along with a cavalcade of knights, were getting ready to accompany him. Jadwiga's father had once taken her and William and the family with him to this beautiful estate when he went there to hunt. She remembered the walls squaring the hilltop, their corner towers, which one sighted across the rolling country long before reaching them, and the rugged palace within the walled enclosure. By day, she and William had explored fern-filled valleys and pine woods, gathered tiger lilies and wood orchids, and at night listened to recitals of exciting battles and victories of the chase. But she knew that there was no hope of repeating that visit at this time. The trip up the broad Tisa River valley to Diószegyőr and the quiet days of living again in the pure northern air were bracing, and King Louis welcomed the Venetian envoys, Leonard Dandolo and George Fantino, in good spirits. Moreover, the Italian mission could not have pleased him better than by bringing him, as they did, the holy relics of St. Paul as a gift. He was deeply moved, and after the successful conclusion of the conference and of his visit, he carried the sacred treasure back to Buda and deposited it in the chapel of St. John in Buda Castle. Later, in a procession whose preparation the young people followed during many days, the king himself marched with the bishops and officers of the realm, as the relics were carried from the castle to the waiting cloister of the Order of St. Paul. The new treaty with Venice was for Louis the outstanding event of this year. By it, the island republic relinquished all claims to Dalmatia, and in addition agreed to pay Hungary on St. Stephen's Day an annual tribute of 7,000 ducats. Neither victor nor vanquished realized that this was to prove their last important negotiation. Chroniclers were setting down these events, though they were apt to give much more space to military successes than to those of peaceful progress. They had spent their ink on Louis's brilliant victories in the wars against Naples and in accounts of his crusades against the Turks and Lithuanians. Later history, however, was to stress his social and economic victories. Indeed, certain discriminating contemporaries already praised chiefly his administrative ability and his exercise of justice. Petrarch wrote of him that he possessed 4 great virtues: intelligence, justice, energy, self-control. And John, Patriarch of Alexandria, sent by the Holy See on a mission to Hungary, reported, "I have never seen a king who combined so much might with so much modesty." Another said, "The more the Lord raised him, the more humble he was." The closing weeks of 1381 were especially filled with arrival and departures of envoys and visitors, but as day followed day, King Louis was less and less interested in their coming and going. He was fixing his attention on his own last journey. and he gave all the time he could spare from internal affairs, from the crisis that again threatened in Poland, and the old and disturbing necessity of watching ambitious Naples, to contemplation, and to the society of learned priests. He was trying to place a widening distance between himself and that pomp and glory which his own restless energy had called into being. He wanted to define his position in the next world, which he felt now to be not far distant. Yet the question of the succession constantly harassed his mind. Many times agreements had been registered, sworn to, but dared he even now depend on them? Bohemia was trying to force him to agree that Sigismund, with Mary, should rule not only Poland, but Hungary, and in the end he yielded to that pressure. In July of 1382, he summoned the Polish governors of provinces to a conference in his northern hunting castle at Zolim. There they would discuss conditions in their troubled country, and declare again for the accession of Mary and Sigismund. He knew that in this assembly he would face a divided loyalty and an uncertain enthusiasm. But when the delegates were assembled and he ordered them to accept Sigismund, they did so. Secretly, the opposition had not yielded. Yet the Poles longed honestly for a settlement, and above all for a strong king, present, not absent. When the time neared for the return to Buda, the king decided to ride homeward, not along the direct route down the Tisa Valley, but by way of the northeast, where he had further work to do. With a limited suite, he left his castle at Diosgyőr and traveled toward the Austrian frontier. But on reaching Nagyszombat, he felt so weak and ill that no work was to be thought of, and he halted his journey to rest in a private house. In the quiet of a large, plain, gray-vaulted chamber, he tried to regain his strength and to compose his mind. Each day, however, found him weaker, until his case seemed indeed hopeless. Messengers hurried to Buda to summon Queen Elizabeth and Mary and officials of the church and state, to call Jadwiga and William, again in Vienna, and the pale king waited, holding the crucifix to his breast. While attendants came and went, and the constant murmur of prayers for the dying filled the room. Many flickering candles gave its austere lines a solemn beauty. No wonder that an awed Europe fixed its thought on that frontier room. The Angevin Louis, only 56, son of Charles Robert, and one of the most brilliant personalities of the century, lay dying in a private house off near the border of his land. Not at Buda, in the midst of all he had so laboriously and successfully constructed. This was, it is true, a time of wandering and detachment, but the great Louis should finish his work in his capital, in his palace, surrounded by those he loved and on whom he had always depended, and cared for by the queen who had been for 30 years not only his royal mate, but his comrade. Elizabeth and Mary were the first to reach Nagyszombat, then Jadwiga and William. Sigismund was in the north, fighting in Great Poland against the partisans of the Duke of Mazovia, who was trying to seize the Polish crown before it should be given to another. How touching were the scenes at the royal bedside in that far gray room, the parting between the king and queen, the husband and wife whose marriage had been a true love match, last words of counsel, last expressions of faith. None were to forget them while they lived, least of all Jadwiga, desolated, indeed, by this loss. As she and William knelt for the last time beside him, faintly but clearly, he again affirmed their heaven-appointed union and gave them his final blessing. Elizabeth and the three young people knelt close together near their king and loved one, a strangely pathetic little group on whom a glorious but heavy heritage now descended. The end came a little before midnight on September 11th. As they kissed the crucifix, it was bathed in their tears. The body was taken first to Buda, where during 6 days of almost overwhelming ceremonies, odd throngs of high and low degree crowded into the capital. From mountainsides brilliant in their early autumn coloring and plains glowing with the harvest, they poured into the black city. Many thousand wax candles burned themselves out, and the intoned Latin of the Mass, the chanting of choirs, seemed never to cease. Finally, the coffin was transported in the state carriage heavy with black and drawn by many horses, to the cathedral at Székesfehérvár, southeast of the capital, and there laid in the chapel of St. Catherine, which Louis himself had built. The culminating solemnities were broken by the weeping of the Queen and Mary and Jadwiga, and by that of many others present. Foreboding mingled with grief, for preceding Louis's death a comet had streamed across the heavens. Of what coming disaster was it the flaming presage? A 3 years' mourning was decreed throughout the land. Sorrow was deep and real. People said they felt as if they themselves were dead.